Welcome to Ask GC Anything. It's not the GCN Show, it's a kind of sequel or prequel. Anyway, without further ado, you can see I'm on my own. I'm in a lone breakaway this week. I've got about a 5-minute lead on the peloton at the latest time check. Hopefully I can hold on till the end. So here we go. Chris Campbell is first up on Twitter, who asks, is there a strategy in relation to getting in and out of the saddle on a climb? Now, it's a good question, quite a simple question, but it is something for the most experienced riders and riders who've been riding your bike for a long time that you don't actually think about it. It's something that's completely and utterly innate. But when you drill down and examine what you actually do on a bike in relation to getting in and out of the saddle, it's really, really important to do it right and at the right times, because you need to ride comfortably and efficiently. Now, first and foremost, riding on a long climb, the best way to do that on a long, steady climb is to ride seated in the saddle with your hands on the tops, pedaling lowish gear. And you may get out of the saddle occasionally should the road pitch up a little bit, or just to alleviate your back or legs. And then in stark contrast, on a short, steep climb, you might exclusively ride that out of the saddle, because that is the most efficient way to deliver power through the bike. And also, you need to think about other impact factors. The weight of the rider, fitness of the rider, the gradient of the climb, the gears you've got. There's so much to consider. Now, consider it we did, because we did a GCN Does Science video on this very subject.
How's that, mate? Yeah, I actually find it quite hard staying in the saddle for that amount of time, and as you said, my tendency really is to get out of the saddle quite a lot as soon as there's an incline. So I'm going to be really interested actually to see how it feels when I am at the saddle most of the time on the next effort, but first of all I'm going to have a bit of rest, make sure I'm rested.
Next up we have this question from Daty O'Troity. I think that's the way you pronounce your name, but apologies if I've got that wrong. Now Daty has asked, hello lads, hello. Could you give me some tips for buying clipless pedals and shoes? And would MTB clipless pedals be an option for riding on a road bike? Now, in relation to that particular question, well, the question in its entirety, it's pretty understandable, because there's so much choice out there at the moment, and it can be quite bewildering for those that are new to the sport. But in relation to MTB pedals on a road bike, I think it's perfectly acceptable, especially if you're doing a lot of getting on and off your bike. For example, say on a short commute and you might be walking to a train. But alternatively, if you're spending an inordinate amount of time on your road bike with no walking, then I would really invest in some proper shoes and pedals, or some road shoes and pedals. You'll get better power transmission because of the carbon sole, and they'll be far lighter as well, just ideally suited to that particular task. Now, in relation to pedal choice, take it away, Dan.
Right, let's start with some road-specific pedals, which are going to look something like these. Now, normally road-specific pedals are one-sided, which means you can only clip in that side and not that side, which makes it ever so slightly more finicky, as some co-presenters know, to actually clip into the pedals.
It's time now for the rapid fire round. First up, we have this from Luigi Medeiros Pereira, who asks, I'm going to try my first everesting next year. Have you got any good tips? Lots of climbing, that's a good tip. Pace yourself. Don't go out the blocks too fast, because you will explode. Next up we have this from Matt Williams, who's asked, I've been told by a riding buddy that my knees point in when I'm climbing out of the saddle. A professional bike fit is not an option due to me being only 15. I've watched a lot of your bike fitting videos, and I've also made sure my cleats are straight, but the problem still persists. What else can I do to stop this? Well, I have that problem on my left leg, and I've got some inserts that I put in my shoe to cant my knee to the left so it doesn't brush along the top tube. It's just the way you are skeletally. I wouldn't worry overly about it, but it is worth going to see a specialist in relation to maybe getting some inserts or a particular different insole just to cant your leg up. Now, next up we have this from Ismail Mazlan, who asked the true benefit of a bicycle. Hashtag talkback. The true benefit of a bicycle is freedom. Then we have this from Jacob Pels. What do you do when you get home from an especially long, hard ride? I get on the sofa and I eat lots of cake. Next up, and finally, from Gregos Chosas, what do you think about riding with a fixed gear? Controversial. As I think it's kind of the best city rider vehicle, what do you think? Now, I've been ruminating over this question. It is a very, very good question. I think, crucially, it's not something I do. I wouldn't really want to ride in busy traffic on a fixed gear, because it just doesn't suit me. But there are a lot of benefits to riding on a fixed gear in terms of training. They obviously do it on the track, but riding in traffic on a fixed gear is fraught with problems if you aren't particularly skilled. I'm not saying there aren't people out there who are skilled, they clearly know what they're doing, but if you're thinking about riding a fixed gear in a city, do some training on some quieter roads first before you attempt it, because it is a little bit dangerous, but you do need to be pretty skilled. Now, just to slow things down a little bit now, I've got this question from John Waddle in the comments section. John's asked, I've signed up for the 2017 Tour of the Borders. I need to lose 20 to 25 kilograms, mostly fat. What is the best and or quickest way to train and burn off the bulge during the winter? I have a good road and a mountain bike, a smart trainer, and also Trainer Road, the training program. Well, thanks for getting in touch, John. And first and foremost, that's a great objective to have. I know that is a particularly good sport, even some wonderful, beautiful countryside. But I'm going to be honest with you, that is a considerable amount of weight that you're hoping to lose. I sincerely hope that you achieve what you set out to do. But to do that, you're going to need to have a real long-term plan over the winter. And what we now, the beginning of October, I think that is in April and the spring of next year. So you need to have a long-term plan, and you need to stick to it, and you need to be very, very disciplined. You also need to make sure you don't lose weight too fast, because that can have a really detrimental effect on your general health. So you need to make sure you have a balanced diet as well as that. Now, in relation to the volume of your training, that's going to be dictated in relation to how much spare time you have, but a real cost-effective way of using your time, the best, is rather than go out for long, steady rides, is do shorter, more intense rides on the turbo trainer and out on the road, even up to an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. You'll burn far more calories that way because your metabolic rate is increased during exercise and also afterwards as well. And for some more losing weight tips, watch this.
Years ago, we were all told that the best way to lose excess weight was to spend a lot of time in the so-called fat burning zone. The theory being that you burn a greater percentage of fat versus carbohydrates at a lower intensity than at a high intensity.
And that's fine if you've got all day, every day to train. But the fact is, most of us don't have that luxury. So if you're trying to train or in a full-time routine, then high intensity is where it's at. Our final question on this week's Ask GCN comes from Neil Moss, who asked, short of falling off the bike, how many ways can you hurt yourself whilst cycling? I have a large amount of training to do for an event next August and want to avoid the worst, most likely ways of injuring myself. Well, thanks very much for this, Neil. It's a cracking question. It's good to see that you're really taking your event seriously and preparing yourself, as it were. Now, as you mentioned, aside from the obvious risks involved in cycling, and that's falling off and crashing, there are a multitude of ways that you can injure yourself. But the most important thing to consider here is that these, for the most part, are actually quite preventable. Now, most injuries and ailments are a result of poor positioning on the bike, and there's so many different ways you can injure yourself that we've actually compiled a complete playlist on injury prevention videos. And the most common ailment that we find is back pain. Hopefully this will help.
First thing that you should look at is your saddle height and position. Before you even get on the bike, place it on level ground and check that your saddle is almost horizontal. Secondly, start riding and have a look at the angle of your knee when you're pedaling. When the crank is at the bottom of the stroke, there should still be a slight bend in your knee here.
Well, it looks like I wasn't caught by the peloton, and I indeed can put my arms aloft in victory. Thanks very much for all of your talkback questions. Please keep them coming using the hashtag talkback on all social media platforms and of course in the comments section below this video. Now, something a little bit different. How about clicking just up here for Keith Bontrager's top 4 cycling innovations. Now, in relation to prevention rather than cure, how about clicking, was it down there or down there? I've forgotten where I pointed to. But anyway, if you click in one of these screens, you'll find a really cool video about how to make cycling safer. It's in there somewhere. Subscribe to GCN 2 by clicking on the globe.